On May 21st, 1969, at a moment shortly before 5 p.m., in the time zone from which they had launched nearly 3 days earlier, the crew of Apollo 10 fired the engine of their service module and entered into orbit around the Moon. In so doing, they became just the second group of human beings ever to experience the sights and sensations of lunar orbit. The following afternoon, there arrived another moment that had been long anticipated in the months preceding the flight. At about 3 o'clock on May 22, 1969, Apollo 10 Commander Thomas Stafford and Lunar Module pilot Eugene Cernan became the first astronauts to pilot an Apollo lunar module in lunar orbit. Command Module pilot John Young followed their progress from the linked command and service modules, as Stafford and Cernan began the first test of the spindly, spidery lunar module in the environment for which it had been designed. In the course of their flight, Stafford and Cernan would take the Apollo 10 lunar module as close as 47,400 feet from the surface of the Moon. The vehicle was not designed for landing. It was too heavy to return to orbit even if it could have landed, and would not have been able to safely return the astronauts from the surface to the safety of the command module. But Stafford and Cernan were able to carry out the tests they had been assigned. They tested the vehicle's radar system, the archetype of those that would guide later crews to the surface, and they tested the engine of the descent stage to gauge the performance of those that would follow it on later landing missions. At the end of their tests at the edge of the Moon, they jettisoned the lunar module's descent stage and fired the engine of the ascent stage to propel them toward the first ever rendezvous of manned spacecraft in lunar orbit. As each milestone event of Apollo 10 passed without undue difficulty or unexpected drama, the eventual first landing, which was planned for Apollo 11 2 months later, grew clearer in the coverage of the media and nearer in the imagination of the American public. The prospect of fulfilling the goal of landing astronauts on the Moon and returning them safely to Earth seemed to brighten with each test that Stafford, Young, and Cernan achieved in their busy hours out there near the Moon, so far off and yet so familiar in the night sky. They were, after all, just a shadow away from landing, close enough for those who would follow them to do everything they would do, and then that one thing more. Suddenly, in those moments of separation and independent flight in lunar orbit, and the pass so close to the surface, and the return and docking and the passage back to Earth, suddenly in that spring of 1969, it was clear that the United States had entered the final phase of its pursuit of landing human beings on the Moon. And the astronauts of Apollo 10 carried out their duties at the very edge of a new era, at the border of an alien world, knowing that their heroics would, by design, be eclipsed by those of the crews who would follow them to that brink, and then go beyond. But it made their work no less central to the success of those later explorers. Indeed, 2 of the Apollo 10 voyagers would benefit directly from the tests carried out during their pioneering visit to the Moon. John Young would return to land on and explore the surface as commander of Apollo 16 in April 1972. And in December 1972, Eugene Cernan would command the final Apollo lunar landing mission, Apollo 17. Cernan would ultimately be the last Apollo astronaut to leave the surface of the Moon, bringing to a close the first tentative steps of a new era of exploration, just as he had, 3.5 years earlier, witnessed firsthand the final steps of a previous age, during the remarkable flight of Apollo 10.